Gregory Peck stands among the most genuinely respected figures Hollywood has ever produced, celebrated not only for what he created on screen, but for the kind of man he appeared to be when the cameras stopped rolling. Millions knew his face, his voice, and the quiet authority he carried into every role. Far fewer knew about the woman who lived in a private corner of his heart for the better part of his life. In his final years, Peck allowed that truth to surface, and what it revealed changed the way people understood everything they thought they already knew about him. Gregory Peck was born Elder Gregory Peck on April 5, 1916, in La Jolla, California, a world away from the brightness and noise of Hollywood. The streets were quiet. The air carried the ocean. The pace of life was slow and deliberate. It is difficult not to wonder whether that early environment quietly shaped a man who would later become famous, precisely for his stillness, his calm, and his refusal to perform louder than a moment required. His childhood shifted early. His parents separated when he was only 5, and much of his upbringing fell to his maternal grandmother, a woman whose influence would prove lasting in ways he likely could not have measured at the time. She took him to the movies nearly every week, turning those darkened theater visits into something closer to ritual. Picture a small boy sitting in the flickering half-light week after week, watching larger-than-life figures fill the screen with confidence and feeling and purpose. It would have been almost impossible for that not to leave a mark. For Gregory Peck, cinema did not stay entertainment for long. It became something he needed. His grandmother gave him more than movie tickets. She gave him consistency during a period when his family life had fractured. She surrounded him with stories, books, and conversations about characters and performances. Where many young actors find their way into the craft through raw ambition, Peck seemed to find his way through something quieter. He watched carefully. He absorbed slowly. He understood before he ever attempted. Formal education reinforced those qualities. St. John's Military Academy instilled structure and personal discipline at a young age, and traces of that training would follow him into every professional space he ever occupied. There was never anything loose or undisciplined about Gregory Peck on screen. His posture held. His voice stayed level. His presence never grasped for attention. Those were not simply natural gifts. They were the product of years of deliberate formation. University of California. Berkeley came next, where he split his academic attention between English and pre-medical coursework. The combination sounds unusual until you consider what it actually represents. Literature on one side, human science on the other, emotional truth sitting alongside biological fact. That particular mixture of interests may have contributed more to his later work than any acting lesson ever could. He brought a kind of thoughtful precision to every performance, as though each word had been considered carefully before it was spoken rather than simply delivered on cue. His physical presence helped open doors, though it never fully explained what kept them open. At 6 feet 3 inches tall, with a deep voice and strong features, he commanded attention the moment he entered a room. But Hollywood has always had no shortage of tall, handsome men. What separated Peck from that crowd was something harder to quantify: quiet intensity, the kind of calm that does not need to announce itself, the kind of confidence that does not require an audience to validate it. The turning point that redirected his life came through a scholarship to the neighborhood Playhouse School of the Theater in New York. From that moment, commitment became total. He threw himself into stage work with the kind of focus that serious theater demands, eventually performing in more than 50 plays and 3 Broadway productions. The stage is an unforgiving environment. There are no cuts, no retakes, no clever editing to rescue a weak moment. Every performance has to hold on its own from start to finish. Gregory Peck not only survived that environment, but earned genuine respect within it, and that foundation theatrical discipline would later make his film work feel grounded in a way that audiences recognized even if they could not quite name. His film career launched in 1944 with The Keys of the Kingdom, and almost immediately the industry took notice. An Academy Award nomination arrived shortly afterward, establishing him as one of the most promising new presences in American cinema. It was a remarkable distance to travel from pre-medical courses at Berkeley, and it happened faster than almost anyone could have anticipated. One scholarship, one serious commitment, one performance, and the trajectory of an entire life changed direction. The decades that followed built something rare. Most fame in Hollywood attaches itself to glamour controversy, or sheer force of personality. Gregory Peck built his reputation on something far quieter: moral strength, integrity, a kind of decency that audiences sense was not manufactured for camera. His roles consistently place him in situations requiring courage under pressure and compassion under fire, and he met those demands so naturally that people stopped thinking of the performances as performances and started thinking of them as reflections of the man himself. Then came To Kill a Mockingbird, and with it, Atticus Finch. The role transcended cinema in a way that very few ever do. Atticus Finch did not simply win awards or generate critical praise. He became a moral reference point, a figure people returned to when they needed to be reminded what quiet courage and human decency actually look like in practice. No shouting, no dramatic gestures, just steady, clear-eyed conviction delivered with complete humanity. People still reach for Atticus Finch when they need that reminder, and they probably always will. What made that performance so enduring was the same quality that made Gregory Peck himself so enduring. He made goodness feel powerful rather than soft. He made decency feel like a form of strength rather than an absence of ambition. That is genuinely difficult to achieve, and very few people in any generation manage it. His reputation away from the screen stayed just as consistent. Hollywood has always been an industry where public images erode quickly, where yesterday's symbol of dignity becomes tomorrow's cautionary tale. Gregory Peck moved through nearly 5 decades of public life without that erosion. Admiration did not fade with trends because what people were responding to was not a trend. It was authenticity, and authenticity does not have an expiration date. Looking back at the full shape of his career, the quality that seems most central to everything he accomplished was not his height, not his voice, not even his extraordinary range as a performer. It was emotional steadiness, a kind of internal quiet that audiences felt rather than consciously recognized. He never demanded their attention. He simply held it naturally and completely, from beginning to end. And perhaps that restraint, that deliberate refusal to reach for more than a moment required, is what made him impossible to forget. But none of that fully prepares you for what was quietly happening beneath the surface. The man the public saw was composed, morally grounded, and seemingly unshakable. Directors experienced his discipline firsthand. Audiences encountered his dignity through role after role. Close friends, however, reportedly described something else when they spoke of the private Gregory Peck: a sadness that never fully lifted, a reflective quality that occasionally crossed into something heavier, a kind of emotional distance that seemed connected to a memory or perhaps a person that nobody outside his innermost circle fully understood. His marriages were both matters of public record. He wed Greta Kukkonen in 1942, and together they had 3 sons. His second marriage, to Veronique Passoni in 1955, brought 2 more children into his life and endured for decades. From every external angle, both chapters of his personal life looked exactly as one would expect from a man of his standing. Elegant photographs, measured interviews, public appearances that projected warmth without ever revealing anything that was not meant to be seen. Classic old Hollywood discretion, practiced with precision, but quiet observations had been circulating among longtime friends for years. Nothing that would feed a tabloid. Nothing loud or dramatic. Just small, persistent details that people who knew him well found difficult to ignore. Old letters that never found their way to the trash. Photographs that survived every move, every career transition, every major milestone. The kind of things that people only hold on to when letting go feels genuinely impossible. Those who had access to his more private moments described an emotional attachment to a woman from his earlier years that had never fully released its hold. This was not the kind of story that involved betrayal or reckless behavior or scandal. It was almost the opposite, a quiet, steady devotion that had apparently frozen at some point in time and simply refused to thaw. People close to him reportedly noticed that certain conversations about the past could shift his entire presence in an instant. His tone would soften, his pauses would lengthen, his eyes would drift somewhere that had nothing to do with the room he was sitting in. Those kinds of reactions say more than rehearsed confessions ever could. It is not a difficult thing to understand, honestly. Most people have known at least one emotional chapter that did not close the way it was supposed to. Fame does not grant immunity from that experience. A successful marriage does not automatically dissolve every connection that existed before it. Public admiration cannot reach far enough inside a person to silence what they carry privately. Human emotional life refuses to follow clean, logical timelines, and Gregory Peck was, beneath everything else, a deeply human person. People who worked closely with him over the years reportedly believe that some of his most powerful screen moments drew from this hidden well of personal feeling. Scenes involving sacrifice, regret, or love expressed through restraint rather than declaration often landed with an unusual depth on screen. His admirers credited his technical skill and his natural gifts. Those who knew him better suspected something more personal was quietly fueling those moments. Emotional recognition rather than method technique. Feelings that already lived inside him long before any director called action. It reframed certain performances in interesting ways. The careful tenderness in his romantic scenes. The quality of careful guardedness that appeared whenever his characters were protecting something they could not bear to lose. Audiences interpreted all of it as extraordinary acting. A smaller group apparently suspected it was also something closer to lived experience finding its way through the work. His generation treated privacy as a non-negotiable value, and Gregory Peck honored that completely. No memoirs exposing emotional wounds. No interviews built around personal revelations. No public confessions designed to generate sympathy or headlines. In the current entertainment landscape, that degree of restraint is almost incomprehensible. Vulnerability has become a commodity now, something performers offer audiences in exchange for connection and continued relevance. For Peck and the generation he belonged to, pain was private, longing was private, love, when it needed to be, was private too. And in a strange way, that silence only made the emotional weight heavier. Close acquaintances believed that a certain loyalty of feeling had remained constant in him throughout his life, not because his marriages were failures or because happiness had eluded him. Human emotional reality is far more layered than that. People carry multiple truths simultaneously. A man can be genuinely devoted to his wife and still find that an earlier emotional memory refuses to fully release him. Life arranges itself in complicated ways. Hearts do not always cooperate with the stories we prefer to tell about them. Some accounts suggest that he kept physical keepsakes connected to this earlier chapter across many decades. Handwritten notes, small photographs, the kind of objects that most people discard during life's inevitable transitions without giving it a second thought. But some people treat their emotional past differently. They keep those quiet artifacts not out of dysfunction, but out of a deep unwillingness to pretend that something which mattered deeply no longer exists. The irony of Gregory Peck's public identity was always that the qualities audiences most loved in his fictional characters, their moral certainty, their unshakable sense of right and wrong, their composed strength under impossible pressure, were precisely the qualities that real human emotional life tends to undermine most quietly. Real feelings do not resolve themselves the way movie plots do. Real emotional crossroads do not always get revisited and corrected. Some things simply stay unfinished, not through failure or weakness, but through the ordinary, unavoidable complexity of being alive. Perhaps that unresolved interior life was part of what made performances feel so genuine across generations. Audiences rarely connect with perfection. They connect with the sense that something real is happening beneath the surface. And beneath the polished authority that Gregory Peck projected so effortlessly, something real had indeed been happening for a very long time. A love story from an earlier chapter of his life that had never quite reached its ending. The question that lingered was simple. Who was she? Everything about Gregory Peck's public presence suggested a man fully in command of himself. The calm voice, the measured expression, the moral authority that seemed to extend naturally beyond any role he played. From a distance, his life looked like the kind of disciplined, admirable narrative that very few people actually manage to construct. Up close, the picture was considerably more complicated, and the people who were genuinely close to him reportedly knew it. The observations had accumulated quietly over years. Silences that lasted a beat too long. Conversations that drifted unexpectedly toward earlier times before being gently redirected. Photographs that stayed protected through every transition. Letters that remained carefully preserved long after the circumstances that produced them had changed beyond recognition. These were not the behaviors of a man who had processed and released an old emotional chapter. They were the behaviors of a man carrying something he had chosen, consciously or not, to hold on to. His first marriage, to Greta Kukkinen in 1942, unfolded during a period of rapid professional ascent. Career momentum was building. Public attention was growing. Family responsibilities arrived alongside 3 sons and the daily rhythms that come with building a household. Hollywood presented him exactly as studios preferred their stars to be seen during that era. Solid, dependable, a man of traditional values whose private life would never disturb the image his professional life was carefully constructing. Audiences responded to that image because they sensed sincerity underneath it. Gregory Peck was not performing decency. He genuinely possessed it. That distinction, subtle as it sounds, was something audiences felt. And yet those who spent real time with him reportedly noticed a quality of emotional absence at certain moments. Nothing that suggested unhappiness, exactly. Nothing that would register as scandal or cause concern in any conventional sense. More like the feeling that a portion of him was located somewhere else, attending to something internal that had no place in any public conversation. Quiet, persistent, and entirely his own. His second marriage brought Veronique Passani into his life, and by most accounts she brought genuine warmth with her. Her intelligence, her elegance, and the stability she offered during the later decades of his career appeared to matter deeply to him. Their public life together projected the kind of unity that aging Hollywood royalty is supposed to embody. Polished appearances, gracious interviews, a shared life that looked, from the outside, like exactly what it claimed to be, and yet the whispers persisted among those who had known him longest. Something from an earlier chapter had never fully let go of him, or perhaps he had never fully let go of it. Private accounts described a version of Gregory Peck that existed only in trusted company. The composed public figure gave way, in those moments, to something considerably more tender. Old memories arrived in conversations without warning. A name that stayed carefully unspoken in public could apparently shift the entire emotional temperature of a private room within seconds. Those who witnessed it reportedly found it striking precisely because it was so inconsistent with the controlled, measured man the world believed it knew completely. Letters that came to light years later added texture to what had long been whispered. They contained nothing explosive or confessional in any scandalous sense. What they held instead was quieter and in some ways more revealing. Warmth expressed in careful, precise language. Memories treated as though they deserved preservation rather than closure. Photographs showing a softness in his expression that official portraits and studio images had never managed to capture. Not performance. Not charm directed at an audience. Something private, personal, and real. The connection that people described was not built on passion in the conventional Hollywood sense of that word. It was reportedly something more durable and more painful. An emotional understanding between two people that had apparently never been replaced by anything that came afterward. Not because those who came afterward were inadequate, but because certain bonds form in ways that resist substitution. Imagining what it takes to carry that across an entire lifetime, through 2 marriages, through 5 children, through decades of public life, through the accumulated weight of fame and achievement and loss, is genuinely difficult. And yet, that appears to be precisely what happened. The roles he chose throughout his career take on additional meaning when viewed through that lens. Gregory Peck built a professional identity around men who carried silent internal conflict beneath composed, dignified exteriors. Men who protected others while quietly absorbing their own private costs. Men who loved carefully and expressed that love through restraint rather than declaration. Audiences admired the authenticity of those performances. People close to him believed they understood where some of that authenticity originated. Hollywood in his era demanded that its stars maintain carefully constructed public identities. Studios understood that marketability depended on audience trust, and trust depended on consistency. Vulnerability was not an asset. Emotional complexity was not something to be advertised. Stars who allowed their private complications to become public complications risked everything they had built. Gregory Peck understood those rules completely and followed them without apparent resentment. His private emotional life remained his own, protected by a generation's instinctive commitment to discretion. What makes a situation unusual even within that context, is the complete absence of scandal, no destructive fallout, no bitter public accusations, no humiliating exposure, just a quiet, lasting emotional loyalty that apparently endured far longer than anyone outside his inner circle suspected. There's something genuinely moving about that. Chaotic love makes headlines. Quiet, disciplined devotion rarely does. But the emotional weight carried by the second kind is often considerably heavier than anything the first kind produces. Those who knew him in his later years reportedly observed the return of certain reflective moods as he aged. Fame quiets down eventually. The applause moves further away. The career that once consumed every available hour settles into history. Children grow older. The pace of daily life slows in ways that create space for questions that busy decades had successfully kept at bay. What might certain choices have looked like from the other direction? Which relationships had shaped him most fundamentally? Which memories had genuinely never faded, no matter how much time had passed and how full the intervening years had been? Gregory Peck's legacy has always rested on the qualities his most famous performances embodied: strength, wisdom, dignity, moral clarity delivered without arrogance. Atticus Finch remains a defining image for most people, a figure whose quiet courage merged permanently with a man who portrayed him in the public imagination. Audiences believed that goodness because it felt continuous with who Gregory Peck actually was. And they were not wrong. He was genuinely a good man. But good men are also complete human beings, and complete human beings carry emotional histories that do not resolve themselves cleanly or conveniently. The hidden emotional depth that his closest friends observed across the decades was not a contradiction of the man audiences admired. It was an extension of him. The same capacity for feeling that made his performances reach people so deeply was also the capacity that made certain emotional memories impossible to fully release. Beneath every polished public appearance, every calm and measured interview, every legendary performance that has endured across generations, there was a man holding something quietly and privately that the world was never fully invited to see. Memories, tenderness, a love that had apparently decided long ago that it was not finished. And perhaps knowing that makes Gregory Peck feel not smaller, but more completely, irreducibly human than the legend alone ever could. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.